Our focus for today is going to be looking at how we can estimate percent of a number. And so our learning target is I can estimate the percent of a number by using equivalent fractions and compatible numbers. And so remember that when we do our estimates, estimates are going to be about, and we really want to strive to get that best estimate. So really using those compatible numbers to, yes, make it easy for us to do mentally, but also to give us the closest estimate to the actual answer. So if we take a look at our solve and share, Sarah needs to correctly solve 78% of the questions on her math test. The test has 40 questions. About how many questions must Sarah answer correctly on the test? So if I do this, I'm going to do this a couple different ways. So the first way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just approximate 78. So 78 is going to be close to two percentages. So 78 is going to be approximately 80%, and 78 is going to be approximately 75%. Okay. Um, I'm actually going to go with the lower estimation because she needs to correctly answer 78%. So I want a lower estimate that actually, yep, I want a lower estimate than I want a higher estimate, because if she gets 75% chance, she has a better shot of getting that 78%. But you could use 80. Either one of those isn't going to matter. You choose the one that best fits the problem. And so if I did 75% of 40, what that means, if I look at it in terms of a fraction, is it's 3/4 of 40. Well, we know how to find a fractional part when I have 3/4 of 40. What this means is it means 3/4 times 40. And so I do 40 over 1. I cross cancel. So 40 becomes 10. 4 becomes 1. And I end up with 30. So she needs to answer about 30 questions correctly. If I did 4/5, so let's say I did 80, 80 is going to be 4/5 of 40. So my fractional part would be 4/5 times 40 over 1. Cross this out, cross this out. This would become a 8. This becomes a 1. My answer becomes 32. So my answer, 78%, is going to be somewhere between 30 and 32. And so that's how I can look at that with either one of those, doing 75% and 80%. So using, in this case, I didn't use compatible numbers. I left 40 alone, but I went ahead and I rounded my 78% to a compatible number. So 75 would be a compatible number, 80% would be rounding to the nearest 10 place value. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the look back. On her last test, Sarah answered 82% of 60 questions correctly. About how many questions did she answer correctly? So again, same thing. I'm going to take 82% and I'm going to say 82%. I'm going to make that 80%, which we just talked about was being 4/5. So I went ahead and I found that reduced fraction. So I'm going to do 4/5 times 60 because it's 4/5 of 60. And so when I go ahead and multiply, I cross cancel. This becomes 1. This becomes a 12. She ended up getting about 48 questions correctly. So that's how I can use the fractions to help find it. And I'm also using compatible numbers. It's just a great thing because we're already familiar with multiplying fractions. So it's just converting the percentage into a fraction and then multiplying as we go. All right, so if I take a look at our visual learning for today. So our big question is, how can I use fractions to estimate percent? And if we look at our question, it says the graph shows the eye colors among 500 students at a school. About how many students have brown eyes and blue eyes? So if we take a look at our blue eye percentage that we have is going to be 23%. Well, 23% is approximately 25%. And so it's going to be 25% of 500. Well, we know what 25% of. It's going to be 1/4 of 500. So when I have 1/4 of 500, what that's going to translate into is it's going to be 1/4 times 500 over 1. And then I look to see if I can cross cancel, and I can. Here's the thing, if I don't like the 1/4, you could do it as 25 out of 100. So if I look at it at 25 out of 100, so let's see what that would look like. If I did 25 out of 100 times 500 over 1, this becomes 5, this becomes 1, and so I end up with 125. If I went back to the 500 divided by 1/4, this one I would have to do a little bit of digging with, but it would end up being 125. The point is to make this as easy as you can. So if the 2500ths was easier for you to use the 2500ths. If this fraction is the easier fraction to use that fraction. Okay. So the blue percentage is going to be about 125 students. So blue is going to be 125%. And then I don't have brown, so I'll go to orange for brown. And if I look at the brown, I have 46%. Well, 46%, so I'm going to say 46% is near 50. And so I'm going to be looking at 50% of 500. Well, we know what 50% of 500 is. What's half of 500 is going to be 250 students. I guess that's what needs to be up there, not percent. Students. Okay. So again, using what I know to help me find an estimate, a very, very quick estimate. All right, so let's go to the convince me. So if you take a look here, here's how they did it. So they, again, very similar to the steps that I did when doing this. And if we look at our convince me, it says, suppose the graph shows the percent of eye color among 118 students in the 6th grade class. About how many 6th grade students would have green eyes? Explain how you can use estimation to find the answers. So we're looking at now 116 or 118 students. So I'll do 118 students and 16%. So I'm going to say 16% is about 20%. And so it's 20% of, and I'm not even going to keep it at 118 because 118 is not a number that I know how to find 20% of easily. If you know it, great. If you want to keep it at 118, you can, but I'm going to use a compatible number. So I'm actually just going to round it up to 120. So I'm looking at 20% of 120. Well, I know that 20% is going to be 20 hundredths, or in this case, I'm going to use the equivalent fraction of 2/10. I could use 1/5, but again, I'm using a fraction that's going to work for me. And I know that I can very easily cross cancel the 10 and make that a 1. This cross cancels, becomes a 12, and I end up with 24. So 24 students have green eyes. And so what we did, if we go back to our explanation, is I rounded 16% to 20%. I rounded 118 to 120. I used the fraction 2/10. I multiplied that by 120, but I cross-canceled here, and I ended up with 24 students. Okay. All right, so moving into our guided practice. Explain how to estimate 32% of 212. So I'm just simply going to list out the steps that we would do to estimate. So the first thing I would do is I would round 32% to 30. And then I don't like 212. I want to do a compatible number. So I'm going to find a compatible number of 30 that's near 212. Well, that would be 210. So I'm going to round 212 to 210. So I rounded that down to the nearest whole number. And then I'm going to multiply 30% by 210 using a fraction. So what this would be is it would be 3/10 multiplied by 210 over 1. Cross this out, cross this out. This becomes 1. This becomes 21. And then I multiply 3 times 21 is going to be 63. Okay. And so 32% of 212 is approximately 63. So those would be the steps that I would use to round. Make sure that you jot that down on your paper, please. All right, if we take a look at our next one, it says out of 195 students, 9% of the students have hazel eyes. How can you estimate the number of students with hazel eyes? So what we're going to do is we're going to just show what I'm going to round. So I'm going to show my approximation. So I'm going to do 9% is approximately 10%. So again, I'm modeling my math, showing my thinking for those that are looking at it. 9% is equal to 10%. And then I'm going to do 1/10 of 195. But I'm going to say, and I'm actually going to go ahead and keep 195, because what this becomes is this becomes 195. I know we're really working with fractions, but I'm going to turn that fraction into a decimal. And remember that when I divide by a decimal, I move my decimal here one place to the left. So my answer is going to be 19.5. So again, that place value, those place values, those power of tens make it really nice, because then I'm just manipulating those decimals. In problems 3 and 4, we're estimating the percent of each number. So we're going to round 47%. I'm going to say 47% is near 50. And then 77, I don't want to keep it at 77 because I don't like what half of 77 would be. I can find it, but I can find what half of 80 is going to be much faster. And so what this is going to be is 50% of 80 is equal to 40. Okay. And then 18% of 48. So 18%, again, I'm going to round that to 20. And here they said 10. You could leave it at 10, but I could actually find 20% of 48, but I'll round it to 50 because that's what they want here. I know that that's what they want because they gave me the 10. And so 20% of 50 is 10. But if I left it at 48, let's look at what that would be. So if I did 20 hundredths, right? So 20 hundredths is actually going to be equal to 1/5, but I'll leave it. So it's equal to 1/5. It's equal to 2/10. So you have some options when you're going to do this. So if I left it at 1/5 times 48 over 1, then it would be 48 divided by 5. So in this case, yep, it would be easier to just go ahead and round it to 50, because here I'm having to do a little bit more work, whereas I can just say, oh, well, 1/5 of 50 is 10%. So what I would like to see on your independent practice, you have a lot of them, so we're not going to do all of them. I will do a couple with you just so I can show you what I would like to see for these problems. I want you to do, we're just going to go ahead and just start with number 5, is I want to see I want to see the estimation that you did. So I want to see your new thing. So 74%, I'm going to change that to 75% of 60. And then I want to see what your estimation answer is going to be. And so when I look at 75% of 60, that's going to be 3/4 of 60, which is going to be 3/4 times 60 over 1. This becomes 15. This becomes 1. So I end up with 45. So my answer should be 45. So in terms of work, this is what I want to see. I want to see the estimation that you use, and I want to see the answer that you get. I don't necessarily need to see the work. If you want to do the work on the page, great. I know some of you are able to do this mentally. If you're able to do it mentally, feel free. But if there are harder numbers, go ahead and do that work. If you can't do it mentally, then show me the fraction work that you did. Okay, so let's take a look at number 7. So 47% of 183. I'm going to do 50% of 180. Well, I know what half of 180 is. That's 90. So there I didn't have to do any fraction work because I knew what half of 180% was. Okay, if I take a look at number 9, 34% of 55, I'm going to do 30% of 60. And so I look at what is one, it's not quite 1/3. And actually, I'm going to change that. I lied. I'm going to do 33%. And here's why I'm going to do 33%, because I know that 33% is 1/3, and I can very easily find what 1/3 of 60 is going to be. 1/3 of 60 is going to be 20. So I'd take 60 and I would divide it by 3.